Unpacking Joanne, a story of love, loss, and finding home. Frank, look! That muskrat is working on its den again. But Frank didn't answer, because Frank was not there. This didn't stop his wife from talking to him as if he were still physically there and not buried in Mount Hope Cemetery across town. Joanne sat on the edge of her bed looking out the window, the hallway hum reminding her that she was not alone, but she had never felt lonelier. The days in the assisted living facility all seemed to run together, each day like the other, all moving forward to the timing of the cafeteria schedule. Between meals, there were activities she couldn't bring herself to try, so she sat in her small room where she sat gazing out her window at the small pond behind the care facility. From time to time, her patient observation was rewarded with glimpses of the muskrat that lived in the bank of the pond. Occasionally, the scent of honeysuckle bush that grew 2 stories below her room wafted in. It was a pleasant enough room, everything clean and new. Joanne's daughter had hung a crystal sun catcher that scattered rainbows all around each morning. The staff were friendly and kind. But truth be told, she felt like she was just marking time, waiting for the day when she would be able to join her husband once more on the other side. Her children insisted that she would adjust, but the word felt impossible. Nothing here felt comfortable or familiar like the house she had shared with Frank. Nothing held the softness of their shared routines, the quiet comfort of his chair beside hers in the living room. She missed the mundane history held by the home, the marks on the wallpaper of the kitchen that showed her children's height at various ages, the scrawled crayon picture of a family holding hands at the back of the closet that she had never been able to bring herself to paint over, the creak in the 3rd stair that she had lain awake many nights listening for when her children were teens and had been out with friends. The home that had been like everything to her, even though it had been small and time-worn. And now it was gone, sold to a developer who would tear it down and build a big, boxy modern house that would take up most of the lot. Her decades-old rose garden alive with bees and butterflies, and the pear tree that gave perfect, juicy, golden-colored pears each year would be torn out to make room for it. She worried about what would become of the birds who were used to the feeders outside the living room window that she kept well stocked with seeds and suet every winter. Instead, she was in a recently built, state-of-the-art facility where the hallways still smelled like new carpeting and fresh paint, where she had to be fully dressed and presentable before stepping out the door of her little room, because on the other side of her bedroom door it was all shared public space. The furniture in the various sitting and activity rooms was all objectively better than her old sagging green sofa, but it had all the comfort and charm of what would be found in a hotel lobby. Nothing of the tasteful art on the walls of the hallways held any meaning for her, unlike the framed family photographs and children's artwork that had decorated her former home. She might have to live here now, but she did not have to like it. One afternoon, about a month after moving in, Joanne found herself digging through the back of her closet for a sweater that she was sure had been misplaced. Her hand brushed against a plastic storage bin. It was heavy and awkward, shoved carelessly behind the hanging dresses and her winter coat. Kneeling, she dragged it out into the room. Her kids had done all of her packing for her when Joanne had refused to participate in the process. She wondered what she would find inside. Under the lid were scraps of her old life, a few birthday cards and old letters, photographs, a couple of journals she had kept years ago, a china teacup she had once sworn she'd never pack away. There was a folded lap quilt her mother had sewn by hand eons ago from cloth cut from the dresses Joanne had worn as a child, the worn cloth butter-soft beneath her fingers. This Joanne put over the back of her recliner. Turning back to the bin, she found nestled at the bottom a box she hadn't thought of in years, her old set of flower essences. She lifted it out and cradled its once familiar weight in her lap, surprised at the sudden rush of memory. She had leaned on these remedies during difficult times, when her children were small and sleepless nights seemed endless, when her husband had faced his first surgery, even when she had once considered moving to a new job far away. She opened the booklet, the thin pages soft and familiar under her fingers. One description stopped her cold. She took a sharp breath and read aloud. Honeysuckle, for those who live in the past, long for what is gone, unable to accept the present. Oh, Frank, that sure describes me, she whispered to the empty room while tears welled up in her eyes. With trembling hands, she prepared a small glass of water with a few drops of the essence. It felt almost naive to consider, but as she sipped, something seemed to shift. Something small, but real, like a window cracking open to let in air she hadn't realized she needed. A honeysuckle-scented breeze. The next morning, she noticed her neighbor, Margaret, tending a pot of ivy outside her door. Normally, Joanne would have hurried past, but instead she paused, complimented the lush, glossy plant. She wasn't sure if it was the honeysuckle drops or just the ache of missing connection, but something inside her had softened. I started this plant from a cutting my little Timmy brought me from his teacher's plant at school. That was 30 years ago. Now Tim owns a plant nursery. Margaret chuckled. The seasons of life sure do fly by. A few days later, when an aide invited Joanne to a watercolor class, she didn't refuse automatically. She thought of honeysuckle, of letting herself root where she was, and she surprised herself by saying yes. The weeks that followed weren't suddenly easy, but they were different. She still missed her house, still reached for memories of her husband, but she no longer felt trapped in her new surroundings. It was as though the remedies softened the sharp edges of longing, turned them into threads she could weave into her present life. Though she occasionally participated in the facility's planned activities, many days she still spent time in her room, seated, now warmed by the lap quilt, watching the antics of the busy muskrat. She placed a framed photograph of her husband on the small table by her window and began using her special teacup again. As she sat, watched, and sipped her tea, she would talk to Frank. After so many shared years together, she had no difficulty imagining what he would say in response. These small tokens helped carry a bit of the essence of home into this new space. Slowly, the assisted living flat didn't feel like a replacement. It felt like another chapter of life. Joanne joined the gardening group, offering her skills with a care of rose bushes. In her watercolor class, she painted clumsy but tearful flowers. She found in Margaret a lovely conversational partner over afternoon tea, someone with whom she could share her memories of Frank and the life they had built together. Margaret contributed to these chats anecdotes about her mischievous grandchildren that left both women laughing out loud. Joanne was surprised to find herself laughing again. It felt good. She realized she wasn't leaving her past behind. She was carrying it with her in a gentler way. And though she still whispered good night to her husband's picture each evening, Joanne began to wake each morning with a little more openness, a little more ease, like honeysuckle itself, climbing toward the light, life beginning to bloom again. And so, with the gentle grace of the honeysuckle flower essence, Joanne's heart began to soften. Not to leave the past behind, but to weave it gently into the life that she was living now. If this story spoke to you, I'd love for you to subscribe and settle in with me for other flower essence stories like this one. And if you've ever found your own kind of honeysuckle, something simple that helped you heal or find your footing again, I'd be so honored if you'd share it in the comments below. Your stories, just like Joanne's, remind us that we are never alone on the journey home.